to introduce Jennifer Johnson from Environmental Health. Thank you, Jennifer.
Welcome.
And Kelsey Crane from Community Planning and Economic Development. And they're going to give us a holistic view of lake and water quality today with septic systems and how you can better help the lake with your lawn and garden and stuff like that. So with that, Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, really grateful to be here tonight. Thank you so much. We are going to kind of tag team this presentation, and here's a sneak peek of what's to come with our agenda tonight. And go ahead, Kelsey.
I brought a mic. Do you like the mic?
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Cool.
Okay, cool. Right on. So we just got introduced. Here we are up on the screen. My focus at Thurston County in community planning has been stormwater from the start, and stormwater is water, and I believe that water is water is water, and so much of that accumulates in our lake, right? So, and then Jennifer is our expert in environmental health, and she's going to be talking about septic and all kinds of other things like natural yard care. So, let's get started with the giveaway.
Yeah.
Are we ready?
Okay.
Okay, is everybody ready?
We are.
In this, what should we raffle off first?
Let's do
Grandma's Weeder
Grandma's
Tool?
Weeder Tool.
All right.
Those are so cool.
They are so cool.
I love the gas clip tonight.
So just got
This is Jim Beal.
Jim. All right.
Jim,
There you go.
here you are.
You can get started right after the meeting.
Let's do another one. Let's do another one.
Okay, let's do another.
Scotch.
Okay, this one is for a yard soil sample. Okay, so we all have a shared goal. We're all here because we love this lake. It's a beautiful lake. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for inviting us out. And the goal is really a healthy lake, right? So I created a series of maps here just to orient us. This is where we are. This is where we are in Thurston County. And thinking about Lawrence Lake in the whole watershed context, we're in the Deschutes watershed. I think everyone here is pretty clear on that because of the interaction with the Deschutes River with this lake and the history there. But it's really important to note the place in the watershed and that this small little lake here, which doesn't feel so small when you're standing right next to it, flows into the Deschutes and all the way down to Puget Sound. So there's a huge impact from this lake here and all the way through the entire watershed. And the drainage context is really important too. Obviously, lakes are basically, this is an unromantic way to say it, but a pothole, like a low point, right? And that's how drainage works. Everything flows lower to lower elevations, down a hill, and in the case of a lake, everything around it is flowing directly into it. Okay, so you see the highest elevations up at the north, and the very lowest elevations in the center of the lake, and then it gets pretty low down here at the very south. And where it doesn't look like a lake down here, oftentimes it can become like a wetland. There's a lot of water draining down in the south areas of this lake. And then there's a really great map here. I love this map. This is so cool. And it shows the outfall in the dam here. So you see where the outfall is directly to the Deschutes River there. And in the past, importantly, where the Deschutes was diverted via ditch and where the lake was filled with river water. So these are all big important pieces of the context because the history of the lake is still with us, very much so today. Another big piece from that slide, but I'm going to use this map because it actually shows the sawmills, are the two sawmills. And at the time, they were relatively small sawmills. There was, from what I read, 5-ish people working per sawmill, but the actual impact was big. And a lot of the reason for diverting the Deschutes River up into the lake was to move logs. And the logging industry at the time was just booming. And then there were folks riding these logs all the way down to Tumwater Falls. So pretty cool history. Because of the sawmills, there's a lot of sawdust in the base of the lake today. So we're going to talk about influences. This is a bit of a scary map, but we have to talk about it. This is a septic map. So what you're seeing there with the orange and the red dots, those are septic systems, and that shows you, based on what I just talked about with the elevations up in the north, highest elevations and draining towards the south, those are all the developments around the lake and the septic systems that are also contributing, running into the lake. So mostly what we'll focus on with our presentation is stormwater runoff, which is any kind of rain or snow melt that lands on hard surfaces and runs off, taking everything with it into low points, right? And so in our case, into the lake. We'll talk about nitrates from septic systems. So this is a bit of a zoomed in view, and this, just so everybody's aware, is not actual data. This is a model, and it's based on estimated habitation levels, and it's also based on the time period in which the lake was developed, so that the times when the homes were built and what kind of septic systems were installed. And then another big influence is nitrates, and this is common across the world. Nitrates from our yard care practices. So when you look around the lake, and this is not just Lawrence Lake, but look at where we're at now, the community center, there's a lot of grass. And so grass is a big, big thing across the whole world too. Funny enough, it was started by the golf industry, so we can blame it on them. They made us all think like we need to have these grass lawns, and there's big movements away from grass lawns now, and we've got a lot of resources if you're interested. But as we are now, the lake is lined with homes, and those homes have a lot of lawns, and that's the case for a lot of lakes. If you have a lawn and you're using quick release fertilizers and you're using pesticides and chemicals and those kinds of things, just keep in mind, all of that runs into the lake. And so with our goal of that healthy lake, we're gonna wanna consider other pathways that don't involve quick release fertilizer, that if you need to have that lawn, that use slow release fertilizer, and that use things like the Grandpa's Weeder tool that Jim just won to pull the weeds and address that. And we have a lot more tips and tricks that we want to share with you. So everybody who applied for the raffle will be getting that information from me. So this is just explaining more about how water is water, okay? Because when we talk about the lake water, a lake is tied into the groundwater. Lawrence Lake, this is very true. There's springs underneath Lawrence Lake that connect directly to the underground drinking water, the aquifer. 90% of Thurston County drinks this water. So there is an exchange happening at all times with Lake Lawrence and with the underground drinking water. So that's very important, because then you have to think about, okay, so how does groundwater move around the lake? Groundwater moves around the lake kind of like this. So then you've got influence coming up from the south of the lake, and you've got influence, and you got to think about everything that's happening around the lake. And this isn't just for the lake. This is any landscape, your home landscape. When you think about the influence that you're having and how water moves across your property, that's why it's just so important for all of us to work together and think about what products we're using and how we go about our daily activities, how we maintain our cars, picking up our dog food, all of these things, right? Because we've got movement happening all from underground through little pebbles and gravelly areas, moving into the surface water or the lake, and then you've got outflow here, as it shows, going directly into the Deschutes River, and then you've got evaporation going up into the clouds, which move and then drop rain elsewhere, and so we're really all connected in this.
Did you have a question, sir?
Do you mind questions?
Oh, yeah, I'll take a question.
So the springs that feed into the lake, do we know from whence that water comes? Is that the shallow aquifer that's just bubbling up, or does it come more from an artesian type well that's sourced from a different aquifer?
Usually they're more shallow. So I would love to direct you to Kevin Hansen, our hydrogeologist, and he would absolutely love to present. He'd love an opportunity to come out and talk about this stuff with you all, give you the details, bring some cool maps. But usually it's the higher, so you see the water table here on this map?
Right, yeah.
So that is the aquifer, but that's the shallow. And so yeah, usually the data is from shallow aquifers or shallow wells where we're getting a lot of the hits with nitrates and these types of chemicals. Okay, and then everybody probably knows about the watershed, or the water cycle within the watershed. And I just wanted to really hit this point, which is that all the water is connected. So when we think about a healthy lake, we're thinking about a healthy river, we're thinking about a healthy aquifer, we're thinking about everywhere that water is moving to, and that means that as we go about our lives, we start to act a bit differently, because it's not just about our lake. We realize that the lake or the water in Olympia is gonna impact us, and that our neighbors in Rainier and our neighbors in Tenino and all across Thurston County, we're all impacting one another with our behaviors. Okay, so a big piece of stormwater and a big piece of the puzzle here also is with more development or hard surfaces comes, and more pollutants with generally the way we have created our societies, the uses that we have across our businesses, the types of businesses that we run, and the byproducts of those businesses. Those two things mixed, and they create increased stormwater runoff. So again, when it rains and it falls on hard surfaces, roofs, roads, development, the water used to just soak in slowly to the ground and recharge the aquifer. And that's not always the case anymore. Now it's being moved via pipe, pavement, ditch, and it's just a completely different game. And all of that pollutant that is accumulating on our roads and on our roofs and everywhere is moving with that stormwater, and it's untreated. It's not going to the wastewater treatment center.
Was there a purpose of showing 1991?
Yeah, I was just showing that over time there's been more development. That's the main purpose of this slide. Okay, so we talked about stormwater, we talked about how that stormwater lands on our hard surfaces, runs off, and it picks up things like leaking septic systems, activity on a construction site, any of your pet waste, leaking hard fluids, tire dust, pesticides, fertilizers, if there's agricultural operations, livestock waste, anything literally that can be left on the ground ends up in that stormwater. And what we're finding measuring this stormwater these days, we're finding thousands of chemicals in it. And I do want to plug one thing, if you can go back for just a second. If there's any place on the lake that you find an issue with pet waste, we have free pet waste stations. We'd love to get in touch with you. Just email us and we can hook you up.
There's one at the park that I saw, but this would be, we know that not everybody just walks their dog here, right? Sometimes, for whatever reason, it seems like somebody's yard becomes that location where all the pets come to play. So just let us know. We're happy to get another few up around the lake if that
All
would
the
be helpful.
community parks around here have the pet waste
Okay,
stations.
super.
But what doesn't have the pet waste station, and I would ask you to get with Ed Marsons, is our county parks manager.
Oh, okay.
The county park is a 15-acre park, 1,500 linear foot of shoreline over by the public boat launch.
Okay.
If they could put a couple down there, that would be great, because we've had a couple pets down there
That sounds
right
great.
down the waterfront.
Yeah,
Okay. That sounds
absolutely.
great. Absolutely.
Okay, so I was talking about back in the day, so we have more development today, right? Over the last 30 decades, I was able to get somewhat of a clear map in 91. There were some older maps. That's the one I used. So say 30 plus years, there's been a lot more development, more housing, more roads, more of all of that, right? Back in the day, Lawrence Lake was forested. Hence the lumber industry out here, right? Not only Lawrence Lake, but the Pacific Northwest. We're known for trees, big trees, and amazing forests. And so the way that that works is when it rains and if there's snow melt or if there's a storm surge on the coast, it's that vegetation and that duff, the layer of organic matter on the top of the forest floor, is able to take and slowly drain that water, and it creates what is called a buffer. And that is so important because the roots store water in trees, and the vegetation actually filters pollutants and sediments. So one of the behaviors that we'll talk more about is creating buffers along between the use, whether it's your house or business, and the lake to protect that lake. So that's one of the best behaviors that we can all contribute to. So today where we're at, and I'm pretty sure most of us are aware of this, Lake Lawrence is a eutrophic lake. So, and it's important to note that it's a natural process that lakes move through over time. It's just that humans in our behavior and the way we've modified things, the way that we've created our lifestyles, we have sped this process up. And I'm going to explain eutrophic, don't worry. More or less means it's a high nutrient lake. Has a very high level of nutrients in it, and the process that happens there, I'll explain in just a second. But what we're seeing is algae blooms. I think a lot of us have received the notifications recently of the toxic algae blooms, and this is really, really important. And so this is something that we need to talk about, and this is a big reason for us to take action for a healthy lake. So eutrophic, I mentioned that fancy word. Eutrophic conditions come from a water body being fed too many nutrients. That also means the nutrients just ran off the landscape into the lake, or past usage, like the sawmill, added nutrients directly into the lake. And mostly we're talking about phosphorus and nitrogen here. The excess food causes algae growth, and then when the algae dies, bacteria feeds on it, and it creates a low dissolved oxygen condition. So dissolved oxygen is just a fancy word for available oxygen. So we'll share this presentation. Jennifer printed out a bunch of them, but these are links that are really good if you want more information on toxic algae and algae blooms in general. And another thing, if you go to the next slide, that we would love to share is the sign-up form for your lake to receive those algae notifications. So then, if there is a toxic algae bloom or any chance of it, you'll receive a notification in your email, and you can keep your family and your pets safe and kind of stay away from it. And another thing that we're really talking about at Thurston County and across the world, because the toxic algae blooms can be very dangerous, and we've seen pets die, and our friends and families get sick. And because of that, it'd be really great for us all to sort of be aware of what an algae bloom looks like and be equipped and empowered to be able to call those in whenever you see one, even if it's not toxic. Just be able to call those in so that we can then come take the samples and get that process going and get that information out as soon as possible for folks. So we've kind of set the stage for where we're at. How is Lawrence Lake doing? What's the history like? What's our drainage like? What's impacting the water quality? And now, what can we do at home? Because our individual actions, as we mentioned, and as I will continue to preach, are so powerful when we work together. If we're all doing them together, we can really make a big positive impact on our lake. So those individual actions we're going to discuss are practicing natural yard care, which you all have signed up for here to get involved in our raffle. Picking up your pet waste, choosing the maximum buffer protection, especially lakefront properties, using the safest product choices in and around your home, regularly maintaining your septic system, coordinating your stormwater system inspections and maintenance, and then limiting lake inputs in general. So I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Johnson now.
Thank you so much. Okay, so these are essentially the natural yard care practices that we are going to discuss. And Kelsey has mentioned this natural yard care program. So essentially, we have a free online course that you can take. You have given us your contact information, so we're gonna check in with you about that, and it can just be really helpful. And I feel like all of you here tonight are really clearly the movers and shakers in your neighborhood. You're willing to spend some time with us tonight to learn more about the actions, the way that you impact the lake. So any further education that you can get for yourself and then pass on to your neighbors, that's going to be really helpful, because of course you have a much bigger voice in your neighborhood than we do, and we want to help you use that voice to help protect your lake. So naturescaping is essentially kind of this buzzword for ensuring that your landscape is designed for you, of course, for the purposes that you're looking for in whatever landscape design you're doing, but also keeping in mind the area around you. So we're talking about the lake, but we're also talking about the habitat, creating habitat for beneficial insects, for pollinators. How does water move throughout your landscape? And if possible, using native plants. And I love to show photographs of native plants because I think people sort of have this idea like, yeah, we know it's trees and sword ferns. But native plants is much more expansive than that. They're beautiful. The wonderful thing about native plants is that after a few years in your landscape, they will not need additional water. I will say a little caveat about that, because that's what we used to always tell folks, is that after a year or two, they don't need to be watered. I will say, if we have one of those 108-degree days, you're going to want to water those native plants because they are not used to that, right? This is a new phenomenon for us to have very high temperatures. I had a beautiful tree that I'd taken care of for about 3 years, and then we had that summer where we had, 113-degree temperatures for a few days, and I didn't think about that tree, and sure enough, it died. So just keep in mind that in general, these native plants don't need further water, but of course, everybody needs a little extra water when it's so hot. The other thing about native plants is that they have adapted, they've evolved alongside of our insects. And so they are not going to be susceptible to insect problems, so they won't need pesticides. They're great in the landscape, they attract pollinators, and they create habitat for our local flora and fauna.
Jennifer,
Please.
can we put a plug in for the Native Plant Salvage Foundation?
Yes, thank you. That's such a great reminder that we do have a couple of organizations in our community that actually have native plant sales. And then there's also, so the Native Plant Salvage Project is a fantastic organization who goes out and actually rescues plants from development and then makes this available to organizations like the Department of Transportation so that we have other places to plant these things. And they also actually right now are in the middle of a native plant sale. And then the Conservation District also has a native plant sale in March every year. And it's a great idea to get on that list because those plants are very low cost. And so if you have a whole area you need to plant, or just any area that needs a lovely native plant, very low cost location for that.
So,
There's 4 people that have just joined that are not in the raffle.
Do you want to get involved in the raffle? If you haven't signed up, you can let go. I'm about to raffle off a $50 native plant certificate. Thurston Conservation District.
Come on up, the folks that just came in. That's the one you want.
It's fast.
It's easy and fast.
That'd be fine. You'll just sign it right here, and then I'll get you your thing. Yep.
Yeah, just name and email address or telephone number.
Yep.
So what do you got up there? Raspberry, blueberry, what's the dark berry?
So there is salmonberry up there. We've got thimbleberry. We've got Oregon grape.
got our native huckleberry.
Rhiannon.
And Rhiannon.
I forget this one, this lower, on the lower right.
And it's dark blueberry is what?
Stout.
This one up here, that's our native huckleberry, and then this one is a Oregon grape. Yeah,
I was thinking red.
right? No, there's, we have two native.
Remember to say, put a very shallow layer of compost over your grass. The grass has to poke up above it, okay? But that will really increase the organic matter. And the organic matter is what helps break the nutrients down, so really helpful to have. For insect control, this is really easy, honestly, from my point of view. And I say this as somebody who has 10 acres that I help maintain out on Steamboat Island Road. So I'm not just saying this because, you know, I sit in an office and read about this stuff. I have a lot of practice, I promise. So the safest insect control involves planting daisies and sunflowers. Bam, you're done. Because what you really want to do for insect control is attract beneficial insects. And plants in the sunflower and daisy family does do that. These are the insects that you would want to attract. These are just a couple of examples, the lady beetles and the lacewings. You can purchase these in a store, so if you are having an out of balance insect situation. Several years ago, we have a big stand of poplar trees by my house, and we noticed that there was aphids. And I mean a lot of aphids, because, you know, if you're anything like me, you notice an issue and then you go, yeah, I gotta take care of that, I gotta take care of that. And years go by until we could see like floating aphid dust in the air. There was a layer of sticky aphid stuff on our cars and our decks and our huts. So it got really bad. So we purchased about 1,500 ladybugs. And we released them all on a magical moonlit May evening. And I tell you what, there have not been aphids on those trees or in my garden since. So, big believer in beneficial insects. It was definitely one of those times where you think, oh, I hope this thing works. I've been talking about it for years, and it did, and it does, and yes. So, you know, by planting those flowering plants, as I suggested in the daisy and sunflower family, you're going to attract beneficial insects. But if you get to a point where you feel like you really have an issue, feel free to purchase the ones that they have available in the nurseries. You have to follow the directions to a T. That was my experience, because I've heard people say, well, they'll just fly away. They will not fly away if you have things for them to eat. The other recommendation was that you let them go at dusk. So they kind of just have to burrow in wherever you let them go. So I followed it, and I'm a big believer. If you have an issue with your plants, the recommendation is before you rush out and purchase something, you really observe the location where you're finding there's an issue. Because about 70% of plant problems come from poor watering, low organic matter, winter damage. Very few issues are actually caused by insects. Get your magnifying glass out there and make sure that you actually have an insect before you start rushing. Here's some other tools. And so we've got here a trap. Now this is, if you have an insect problem, it's not like this trap is going to trap all the insects. This is just meant to give you an indication of what insects are you dealing with. The one on the far right is it's called sticky foot or tanglefoot, and you can actually wrap that around the base of trees if you think there's a root weevil issue. And then the other thing is you could just cover problem areas with a floating row cover, and the plants will grow right up and push right over it, or right under it, lifting it up as they go. And so once your plants are nice and big and strong and healthy, they're going to be able to fight back. I'm starting to get fast because I know we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that we get to the septic system component. So protective soil practices involve adding mulch and organic matter. We've talked about that. The intention is to help recreate that sponge that Kelsey was talking about in terms of allowing the water to soak in to the ground rather than running off. So adding organic matter can do that. Conserving water. So if you have some areas that you're watering, not your lawn, but if you have other areas that you're watering, using water conservation tools can be really helpful. We've got soaker hoses and drip irrigation. The other benefit of that is that you're watering just the plants you want. That's going to reduce the weeds, the plants that you don't want from coming up. So in terms of watering, we say morning and evening. As somebody who has a very large area that I take care of and water, I honestly recommend only in the morning. We say morning and evening because that's when there's less chance for evaporation. But in the evening, I find that there's more opportunity for disease to move in. If the plants are staying wet overnight, a big opportunity for disease. So I'll water only in the morning. Now again, when we have those really, really hot days and you've got tiny little baby plants coming up, a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening is fine. But in general, overall, morning only. Just the plants you want. It is such a pet peeve of mine to see water on the hard surfaces, sidewalks, asphalt. Drives me nuts. And for that reason, we don't recommend sprinklers. So a lot more resources. We have a robust gardening program at Thurston County because we all drink groundwater. Anything that gets put onto the ground ends up in our drinking water and or in our lakes. And so please utilize the resources that we have. Tons of information and handouts. So I want to jump into septic systems.
No, you don't.
That was a very strange way to say it. Yes.
Before we jump into
Yes.
Been there.
systems, we're all going into this together. I want to plug the Stormwater online training. It's a free online training. You get to hear me talk for 3 hours. And I recommend you speed me up to 1.5. It'll cut it down to an hour and a half. But we all have stormwater systems. Out here, it's more ditches and swales, ponds, that type of thing, but they also interact with the groundwater, the surface water, and they're a very big deal. And in the private areas, privately owned systems are our responsibility to inspect and maintain, and so that can get complicated. And I teach you how here with a lot of great resources, so check it out.
For pet waste, we do recommend that you pick that up every day or at least every week. If it's in your yard every week, if it's out and about every day, folks will say like, well, it's natural. Of course it's natural. It's still poop and we don't want it to run off and get into our lake. Okay, septic systems. So I kind of brought all my bells and whistles today on septic system care and maintenance. I was here a couple of years ago and talked just about septic systems. So I give a presentation throughout the county and it's about 1.5 hours. So I'm gonna be so quick right now on septic systems, okay? Septic tanks are designed to be settling chambers. Just like that sounds like, you want it to settle, which means you want to conserve the amount of water going into your septic tank. For every gallon of water that goes into your septic tank, a gallon of water goes out into your drain field. The drain field must be protected at all costs. And I say that because it's really expensive to replace a drain field, okay? It's not a whole lot of fun to replace a septic tank. There's definitely a cost involved. But if your drain field fails, that is $20,000, $30,000, $50,000. I don't know about you guys. I don't have that in my back pocket. So I do everything I can to protect my drain field. That means no driving over it. I would never park an RV. I would never have a fire pit. No grazing animals. It's really important that you know where all of the components of your septic system are located. That is your septic tank. If you have a pump tank, now, not everybody has a pump tank. You're only going to have a pump tank if you have a pressure distribution system. For an older home, many of you probably have gravity systems. A pump tank must also, you never want to drive, graze animals, anything over it. So know where all those components are. If you do not know where your septic system is located, I highly recommend that you go to onlinerme, that's what it's called, .com, I think. And you can get all of your records from your septic system. Where is it located? The record drawing of your system, okay? If I have a bunch of information, online RME is definitely in there. If you are having a hard time feel free to call. We have a septic helpline, and they'll walk you through it. So know where everything is. Septic systems have to be pumped. Every single septic tank will have to be pumped at some time. It depends by how many people live in your home, what your practices are inside the home, what are the products that you use. Do you have kids who are flushing a gob of toilet paper down? How often your septic tank has to be pumped is dependent upon how you use your septic system. Every septic tank will have to be pumped. It needs to be inspected every year. That's the recommendation from Thurston County, that it is inspected annually and that will help determine when to get it pumped. So for me, I have 3 people who live in my home. I have a teenager who takes 35-minute long showers, and my septic system has to be pumped every 6 years. Now, I know that I'm on a regular schedule, but if I don't inspect it between 6 years, what I'm losing out on is finding problems when they're small. So I try to get that septic system inspected every year. You can take a training at Thurston County and learn how to inspect your system yourself. I mean, you don't even have to take the training unless you are required to fill out an on-site maintenance certificate with Thurston County. You would know if you need that because you get friendly letters from Thurston County that let you know that. But if you don't need to do that and you still want to learn how to inspect your tank, there's a great video on our website, and it really walks you through. Here's the materials that you need. Here's how you're going to do it. Inspecting your tank means that you're actually pulling up those lids and you're putting down a stick and you're measuring the scum and sludge layer in your tank. So, as I said, this is a settling chamber. And what happens is there's biological activity inside of this septic system, inside this tank, and it is helping to separate scum layer. Fats, oils, greases, hair rise to the top, sludge sinks down to the bottom. I'll let you use your imagination about what that sludge layer is. In the middle is a clear zone of gray water. Okay, this is, as I said, all of the water from your household comes out into the septic system. That's from your sink, your toilet, your dishwasher, your laundry. All water comes through here. You want this to be able to clearly move out through the clear zone and into the drain field. The drain field is where the final treatment happens through the soil of that water. Our septic systems in Thurston County help replenish our drinking water. Really important that you are putting nothing in there that doesn't come out of you or is toilet paper. You want to reduce the amount of hazardous materials that you put into your home. Hazardous materials would be toxic cleaning products, toxic laundry products, hobby chemicals, paints. Limit the amount of harmful materials that go down your septic system, even things that are supposed to go down there, like drain clog reducers. We don't recommend the use of those. We don't recommend the use of additives, whether it's an additive that is a super fancy, high-cost additive that your pumper sold you, or your grandmother told you to flush down yeast. We don't recommend the use of any additives. Okay, we do not recommend that you use garbage disposals, because garbage disposals chop up basically food into tiny little bits. Really easy for tiny bits to get out to the drain field and clog those drain field pipes. Remember, that's expensive, really expensive. So, nothing should be planted over your drain field other than shallow rooted plants. I have a whole brochure over here about shallow rooted plants, so you can determine that. You don't want to water your drain fields. In my yard, I know exactly where the drain field is located because I don't water my grass, but I have 3 strips that are very, very healthy, green, growing grass. And that's kind of it. For some folks, maybe that's the area of your yard that doesn't have any grass on it. And that's an indication that your pipes are pretty near the surface. It's not bad, it's not wrong. It just means that for whatever reason, you can't sustain grass over there. Honestly, I don't plant anything. I don't do anything over my drain field. If a professional comes out and wants to inspect the drain field, I would call Thurston County Environmental Health and ask if that's a good idea. You don't really want somebody out there poking around in your drain field. Okay, so there's a free septic helpline. You can ask questions anonymously. If there's a failure, the service provider will say, you know, that sounds like there's a failure. We're going to ask you to please have a professional come out as soon as possible. But you don't have to tell them where you live. And so, you know, you can manage that on your own. Not on your own. You will need to call a professional, but I'm just saying, you know, if you're like, it's going to take me a week to come up with $600 to pay a professional to come and pump, I recognize that that's the reality. When you pay a professional to come and inspect your system, make sure that if it needs to be pumped, they're ready to pump it that day. The reason why I say that is because, so last time I checked, which was actually last spring, it costs about $200 to have your system inspected and $600 to have it pumped. That is all going to be determined by where you live. Do they have to dig it up? Are you digging it up? How big is your tank? All of that. But what I would recommend is if they're coming to inspect it, you want them to be able to pump it if it needs it, and make sure if you come and inspect my tank and it needs pumped, will you apply that $200 to the cost of my pumping? Right? Because you can imagine that they send the guy out in a little car and he's like, oh yeah, it needs pumped. Well, I can't get to it till Thursday. I'm gonna have to go back and they're gonna charge you double. So not because they're a bad company, but just because that's the reality. So make sure that when they come to inspect, they're ready to pump if needed. Yes, sir.
Is there a mandatory fee that they, meaning the pumper, but ultimately the customer, has to pay to Thurston County when they pump a tank? Most pumpers will pass on a reporting fee. So there's not a mandatory fee that we're charging. There is a mandatory report that a pumper needs to file with Thurston County Environmental Health. And I think every pumper I've ever seen is, of course, going to pass that cost on to you. So does that answer your The answer
question?
sounds like yes.
Yeah,
Well, the reason I say that
Yeah.
is it adds to the cost.
it does add to the cost.
So, you know,
Yeah.
you want to do the right thing, and then you look
Yeah.
at the price tag and you go, my God.
I mean,
It's
last
gotten
time
ridiculous.
I had my tank pumped, I mean, it's been 4 years, I think, but I think they charged me like a $50 reporting fee. Yeah. So
So-
out of $600, I mean, that's sort of, it's the cost of doing business, I guess.
Well, I mean, what does Thurston County do with that money?
Well, we're asking the pumper to report to us.
Right?
So we're just trying to keep track of who's having their tank pumped and who's not, essentially.
So the pumper comes up with the costs. It's not Thurston County collecting that $50. It's the
I
pumper saying that's
think
everything.
so. I don't want to give poor information, but that's my understanding. I don't work in
The
that
city and
department.
the county both charge a reporting fee.
Okay,
Regardless of where you're at, if you're in a municipality and you have a septic system, they will charge you a reporting fee that is passed on by the pumper to you.
Yeah.
That's
Same
what
with
I
the county.
understand. The county does.
yeah,
For us.
that sounds great.
That's correct.
Yeah, and as far as what Thurston County does with that, I mean, they just
That's the question.
pay, I mean, they pay staff to put it into a system and then send out a mailing every 6 years that says, hey, you haven't had your tank pumped in 6 years.
Yeah.
It's just a way that we're trying to create a database of information so we know who's maintaining their systems and who's not. So that, because, you know, as you can imagine, what I hear in my office is, why do I have to maintain my system when my neighbor's not maintaining theirs? And so we're sort of like, everybody should be maintaining their system. That's how we're going to protect our lake. That's how we're going to protect Puget Sound. That's how we're going to protect our drinking water.
I think it's still cheaper than living in the city. I'd rather pump my septic system every 5 years than pay the city of Lacey, you know, $300 a month for sewer and water, so.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so people will say that, you know, well, my septic system's free, or, you know, not exactly, but it's like, well, that money that you would have to pay sewer is really good to kind of put into an account. Probably no one does this. I don't do it, but put into an account so that if you need to fix your septic tank, you've got money. When you need to pump it, you've got money. When there's a backup into your house, that's not pleasant. It's the sewage backup is going to come into the lowest point, which is almost always the shower. And so
I would like to know that I have an account of, oh my gosh, okay, I'm going to be able to take care of this right away. Okay, safe storage of household hazardous materials basically involves, I actually recommend something like this. So this is an example of, a second container. This is what we recommend, that all hazardous materials go into a second container. We don't recommend that you're storing hazardous materials in a well house, but a second container with a lid on it, so that if we have a flood or an earthquake or anything like that, any hazardous materials are in a second container and they're not gonna, end up polluting our water. A few years ago, we had a pretty serious flood down in South County, and that flood water was very polluted because that's a very heavy agriculturally used area, and there was not the safe storage of hazardous materials. Hazardous materials are anything you use to care for your yard, your garden, any cleaning products, anything that has warning, caution, danger, or poison on the label is considered hazardous, should be put into a second container, ideally with a lid. If you have kids, up high. Any questions for us? I feel like the last few minutes was just like, la, 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 la. So, take a breath. And let us know if there's any questions. We have more
about questions. I'm going to start raffling off a few more items.
Okay.